What's a thing that companies call a people problem, but is actually a leadership problem?
Can I say everything?
Yes, I can see that.
My guest today is Lynee, Chief People Officer at NerdWallet. Lynee started her career in the Big Four, including serving on the audit team for Google's IPO, before shifting into HR through roles at Chevron, Make-A-Wish, and then going on to lead people teams at Intel, Mozilla, Twitter, and Envoy. At Twitter, she helped the company grow from around 800 to more than 4,000 employees, complete an IPO, and integrate dozens of acquisitions. At Envoy, she was the first head of HR, building departments from scratch and scaling headcount by more than 200% in 18 months, while the company racked up Best Places to Work and Best for Diversity awards. And at NerdWallet, she stepped into a people leadership role that had been vacant for 2 years, and then nearly doubled the workforce during COVID and moved the company towards remote first, and helped earn multiple Best of Recognition awards. Lynee is one of those rare leaders who's seen how talent decisions compound at every stage, from IPO prep on the auditor side to hypergrowth and first-time people leadership and public company scale. Let's dig into this episode.
Lynee, welcome to the People Multiple Show. I am so excited to have you.
Yay, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I want to start off with this really cool fact that I learned about you. You have a goal of visiting all 50 states before you turn 50. That is such a cool goal to have. I want to learn about the progress you've made on the goal, how you came about setting this goal, and what excites you the most every single time you embark on this mission.
Yes. Well, one thing is I set this goal before I even entered my 40s, thinking that it was going to be a really easy thing to achieve, but I'm getting closer to the 50s decade. Luckily, I have 43 states covered, so 7 more to go, but they're not necessarily next to each other. But the real reason for me setting up this goal was just I was doing a lot of international travel and visiting all these really cool countries. And every time I would come home, I would just think about how I didn't do that same type of travel within the US and how there are so many really fun parts of the country. And I wanted to kind of like even out my travels. So 43 states covered so far, 7 more to go, and only a few more years left.
So cool. And I'm sure you've included your family in this. Is this a family trip, family affair, or is it just you? How does it work?
It doesn't have to include family because
Okay.
that would make it even harder. But I do rope in the family if it makes it easy. So an example is my husband and I went to New Orleans, and Mississippi was somewhere I had never visited. So it's not necessarily really close to New Orleans, but it was close enough. So I said, we can have a whole great weekend in New Orleans for my husband's birthday. But if he would, let's just take a few more days and try to venture off into Mississippi. And so we did that. So if it works out, they get roped in. If not, I'm totally fine doing it, on my own.
Well, we wish you luck in finishing this goal of yours before you hit 50. 50 by 50 is a really great goal, and I think you will be able to do it, Lynee. So we are here cheering for you.
Yes. Yeah. I'll let you know.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears and talk about your professional journey, right? You started in HR through a leadership rotation program at Chevron, which is a highly structured environment. Then you moved to Intel, which has a monopoly or had a monopoly in manufacturing. Then Mozilla, an organization built around individual identity. These are completely different businesses and completely different HR structures as well. Was there a moment in one of those businesses where you tried to apply a standard HR approach and it broke? And what did building something specific to that business make possible for you because you understood the business in the way you should?
Yeah. So someone recently asked me what was maybe the commonality or the through line with all the different companies that I've been at, because as you pointed out, on the face of it, they're very different. And so I did recently reflect on that. And I think the first thing is, although the companies are very different, they all had really strong brands that were explicit. So they owned who they were, whether you agreed with that or you didn't agree with that. And I think what made that really great was it was easier to hire the right people, because they were really explicit about who they were, who was successful there. And it also made it easier to be an employee there as you were growing and developing, because you understood what the brand and what the company emphasized. So I thought that was like an interesting, so although different, they all were very unique, very strong in who they were as companies. I think another thing is the leadership at the top of all of those companies was more of the technical, data centered type leadership. So really being grounded in data, really trying to understand the business and link anything you did, no matter the function, link what you did to the business outcomes. That was also a commonality. But as you said, I went from really large structured organizations in the first part of my HR career to then pivoting to smaller, scrappier, not quite as storied histories yet. So still trying to figure themselves out in the HR realm. And I did have them moment, which I think a lot of people have when you go from large company to small company. I went to Mozilla right after Intel, which Intel, 100,000 person company across the globe. And I remember at Mozilla, one of the first programs I was responsible for was instituting the first performance management system. And I was
Okay.
like, I got this, right? Like Intel had a fantastic performance management
Yes.
system. I'm just going to take the goodness of Intel and fit it into Mozilla. Now, luckily, my chief people officer there, I was one of 3 HR people, and I reported to the chief people officer. She had set it up where I was going to trial my ideas first, and I didn't go directly to launch. So I had a small pilot group, and I was like, here's my great idea. And then they gave me feedback. And they gave me feedback in a very Mozilla way, which is in a public forum. So
Oh.
all of the communications happen on Yammer. So this is pre-Slack, on their Yammer tool. And it was a very open source, open, invisible culture. And so they were giving me feedback on Yammer. And it wasn't positive. I would say it
It
was like
wasn't positive. Okay.
very on the constructive side.
Uh-huh.
And I think there were 2 lessons and great coaching from my CPO at the time. First, she said, don't listen to every single Yammer comment, right? Whenever you launch something new, you're going to hear positive and negative. So of course, there's something to learn and grow from there. And I definitely had to pivot my approach because it was mostly negative. But don't read into every single one. That's part of why you do a pilot in this type of setting. And then the second thing that I think has stuck with me through all the rest of my career is she said the best way to get people to change or evolve is to first respect and understand how they got to where they got to, and give them, praise and kudos for that. Right. And I think about that now just for myself. If, even if I hired a personal trainer to come help me get more fit, I don't know if I would respond well if everything they told me was how I was doing things wrong and how I,
Yes.
hadn't been living a good fit life or something. I think then, just understanding maybe why I got to what I got, where I got to, and then like easing me into that change. So I definitely had my moment of big company structure going to smaller
Small.
company unstructured, and learn from that.
You bring up an interesting point, and this is something I have noticed in my career as well, Lynee, which is when new leaders come into an organization, they quickly go into a problem-solving mode and fixing things and, trying to make an impact. They want to attack the low-hanging fruit. They want to show that they are here to make an impact and that they've been the leader, that they've been successful at other companies for. But they fail to acknowledge the journey that the company has already been on, or the team that has gotten the company to the state that they are in currently, right? And that's where they always fail. I've seen that happen multiple times where we've had to part ways with leaders who fail to acknowledge and recognize and give kudos to the journey that people have already been on, and they jump straight into, oh, let's fix this, this is not working, this is not working. So
Mhm.
I love that you bring that point up, which is, I think, a lesson for all of us to keep in mind as we move into newer environments, to look at what the journey has been and acknowledge it before we start fixing things.
Yes. Yeah. And I get the tension, right? Like you
Hmm.
are hired as an executive
Yes.
because you're bringing some kind of skill set or some capability that they need and they don't have. Um, but as we both know, whether you're a people leader or not, like you are trying to get change through people, and
Yes.
people aren't, a machine where, you say, I have a new way of doing it, like execute, right? That's just not how people work. So it is important as leaders of the people function. But I think, like you said, no matter what leader comes in, I think it's important what area they're leading over. Like, I think it's important for them to understand that.
Moving on in your career, you went from all those amazing names to Twitter, right? I'm so excited about your Twitter journey. This was early Twitter days, if I understand correctly. Take me back to that moment in the New York office when Twitter was just maybe a handful of people, Lynee. You were there early and you were actually building on the ground at that stage. And what did you understand about how culture and talent could evolve that you couldn't have learned at a larger company? It was a very different structure than the Intels of the world when you joined Twitter. I'm just curious, what did you learn about the talent and culture at Twitter at that point in time?
Yeah, I was reflecting on my Twitter time. When I was reading through, the questions and stuff. So I actually joined Twitter in corporate headquarters in San Francisco
Mhm.
because I was living in the Bay Area at the time. And my reason for joining was because there was so much growth. Like, it was an exciting time. It was growing. As you said, I joined a couple of years before they even went public. And
Mhm.
when I first got in, I was like really inspired and excited by the growth. But my particular role that I was doing in San Francisco was a little bit of a copy repeat of other HR business partner roles I had done. So when they posted a role to be the first HR person outside of San Francisco within the US,
Mhm.
in our New York office, I raised my hand because I said, this really amplifies what I signed up for. Not only
Mm.
will I be able to see the growth, but I'll also be able to see it from a different point of view than I had before. So getting there, as you said, we were in a Regis office on Madison and 43rd, and there weren't enough conference rooms. There weren't enough phone booths. This was pre-Zoom days. So it was, handful of people. We had just closed an acquisition in New York, and we had just started really hiring our revenue footprint. And when I got there on the ground, what I noticed is we hired this great set of talent, and we wanted them to unlock, the market for us and really show us what they could do. But they weren't well resourced to do any of this stuff. In San Francisco, if something went wrong in the office, we called facilities. If something
Yeah.
was wrong with a person's computer, we had an IT person right there that we could call over. And we were working essentially out of a closet with none of those resources. And so for me, the real lesson was a little less about pure HR, and it was more from an entrepreneurial lens. Like, how do we help people do their best work? And the first problem set that I helped tackle was the resourcing of the office, of the IT, of the tools, of the communication back through corporate office of what can, be decided on the ground versus has to be decided, by corporate. So it really was an expansion of my skill set in a way, as more of a business problem solver and a general leader, rather than pure HR.
That was an interesting time, right? Like you said, they were setting up new offices. They were scaling rapidly, I believe, at that time. They were integrating, I, if I read correctly, about 50 plus acquisitions, and at the same time preparing for an IPO or looking at going public as well. There was a lot going on, Lynee. How do you continue to build out a talent function so that it continues to produce value while keeping the boat steady and not rocking the boat? How do you continue to add impact in such an environment? I'm really curious what was going through your mind and how you were able to handle the multiple moving parts in the business.
I would say one thing is I definitely had to understand what I was signing up for. Like I said at the beginning, I raised my hand because of the rapid growth and scale that was about to happen. And I will say, signing up for it and being in it are totally different things. So, to show my human side, within that first year of me joining Twitter, I did have my moments where I was like, wow, there's so much work to do. It felt like we were flying the plane while you build it at all times. And I had a mentor that I had confided in, and I was like, I don't know if I can keep up this pace. I don't know if I could keep going. And they asked me a great question, which is, why did you join? And
Mm,
I said, I joined because I wanted to have that lived experience of growing a company from really small to really large. And he was like, well, this is building. And I just had that moment of like, oh, yeah, right? Like, why
you
am I
did get what you asked for.
exactly? So it was like, I signed up for it. And then when I was in it, I realized what it really was. Um, and then he proceeded to give me some advice that, again, I carry with me to this day. He said, because things are changing so quickly, your day to day is going to feel really spiky, right? Like I'm going to have
Mm,
extreme highs and extreme lows. And so in this type of environment where everything feels like it's rapidly changing, he was like, try not to judge your experience day to day. Instead, try to judge your experience over as long a period of time as you can. So he was like, at first, if that's a week, then get a week. If, then you can move to a month. If you can move to a quarter, do that. And then ground yourself in what you wanted to get from this experience. So I would ask myself 2 questions at the end of a time period. I eventually made it to every 6 months,
mm,
that I would check in, and I would ask myself 2 questions. First was something that really bothered me or I found difficult. Did it get better? That didn't mean it needed to be solved or it needed to be, 180 degrees different, but did it get better? Did I see progress? If I could answer yes to that, then I would go to my second question, which was, did I learn something that I didn't think I would have learned? And did I
mm.
learn and grow from that? And if I was able to answer yes to those 2 questions, then I would keep going. So I would like sign up again, for more of the growth. Um, and that is something that I notice when I talk to people who join these hyper growth companies and live through that.
Mm.
The struggle and the difficulty is usually less about their ability to apply their functional knowledge and more about their ability to adapt and grow in this new environment where you feel like everything is changing around you, or it's growing a little bit faster than you can keep up with. So that's just one perspective I have.
What advice would you have for leaders who find themselves in that kind of environment, or not even leaders, any employee that finds themselves in this environment, which is moving at a faster pace than they anticipated and they can't really, keep up with maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to that good advice, and I have told people this advice when I join as a leader and join companies. I see things that are changing. Is one, ground yourself in why you're there, right? Like,
Mm.
why did you join the company, or why do you choose to still stay at the company? Like, try to remember what your value proposition for that work experience is, whatever it is. Some people, it may be, I've never worked in this department before, or I've never worked on this type of problem before. Great. Like, get clear on that. And then I do offer those two questions. Is something that maybe really bothered you or rubbed you the wrong way in the experience? Have you seen progress on that? Have you felt like it got better? And two, are you still learning and growing in the way that you want to? And it's usually anchored back to why you're there in general. So, just regrounding yourself in the why for that particular work at that particular company.
I love that. Ground yourself is such a core principle that we very often forget, but it can truly help us get back to that perspective that we need to have. Lynette, tell us about your time at Envoy. You were the first head of HR building the people function from scratch. You said you moved to smaller, scrappy companies. I think Envoy was one of those. It was a VC-backed company, so it was one of those hyper-growth, moving fast environments. What did that teach you about where the people function actually creates business momentum?
That definitely was a first experience for me, being, first in function, leader in that function, and taking it from that 0 to 1, right? Like implementing the very first ATS, the very first HR operating system.
Yes.
So that was a unique experience in itself. I think there were two things that really stick out to me. The first was about building the function, which is right sizing the solutions. So the experience that I had, the companies that I had, from even coming off the heels of Twitter, which is a smaller, scrappier company, Envoy was much smaller and much earlier stage. And I had so many great ideas. The team around me had so many great ideas of what they wanted implemented at Envoy. But when you have very few resources and you're still in that stage of, yes, we have product market fit, but we're trying to figure out how to monetize this. What is the playbook, the go to market playbook? You're still in
Hmm.
that development phase. What you want to do is think about the essential programs and the essential skills that need to be there, rather than like all the great ideas. And as a people leader, although I was tempted to bring some best in class programs, I really had to understand, like, how much capacity does everyone have around me? Everyone is so focused on just getting job number one, a good, successful business underway, that even if they wanted to, they couldn't do 10 additional people programs. So for me, it was really about right sizing my solutions, like reading the room, right? Like, how much time do people really have to spend on programs? What are the key problems, the business problems or opportunities that are in front of us? And just being super selective around bringing on board programs, a process that helps solve business problems in a really efficient way, and then tabling some of the things that could be added on a little bit later when there was more capacity in the org. And I think sometimes that experience is, double-sided. I think that we were hiring new leaders, we were hiring new employees, and they had context and ideas from the companies that they were coming from, and they wanted those implemented here at the new company. So I had ideas, they had ideas, and we just had limited bandwidth in the organization. So it was really around facilitating and being very discerning about what we did as a people organization.
I love that. One of our previous guests, Natalie, she said the same thing, right? Stage appropriateness is the phrase she used. Bringing the right stage appropriate person as well as the right kind of programs makes a big difference, especially in hypergrowth environments.
Yes, I couldn't agree with that more. And just to add something on, there is someone that I hired in my experience at NerdWallet, really great HR business partner. And she was my first external hire at NerdWallet. And people asked, well, why didn't you hire her at Envoy? And I was like, she was not right sized for the Envoy remit and the Envoy scope of work. And it would have been a mismatch, right? We couldn't have taken
Yeah.
advantage of her full set of talents, and she couldn't, didn't have the surface area to display her full set of talent. So super high performer, great talent, but not appropriate for that stage and size of company.
This reminds me of a program I tried to implement a few years ago, Lynee. We were just about 100 employees, and I was like so eager to implement the high potential program, the talent review process and high potential program. But, it just didn't work out. Even as I was explaining the process and the idea and the intent to my CEO, I was like, oh my God, it's not going to work in a 100-person company. It worked at the consulting firm I was at, which had thousands of people, but it's not going to work here. So it just reminded me of that when you were talking through the stage fit.
Another thing, I don't know if you've had this experience, but it feels like recently so many company leaders are asking, what is great talent? How do I snag great talent? Like, how do I
Yes.
become a magnet for great talent?
Yes.
Of course, there are some shared attributes around great talent. And I think a lot of that just goes back to the fundamentals of great talent, curiosity, self-motivation, a growth mindset. There is a set of things that make people wonderful to work with and around. But to me, the unlock is the context, right?
Mm-hmm.
What stage is your company at? What problems are you trying to solve? And then becoming really clear about that. I think that is the unlock for getting great talent, because then you can go and find the right skill set, the right capability for the problems that you have in front of you in that 1 to 3 year time horizon. So that fantastic engineer at Meta is probably, the wrong fit or potentially the wrong
Yes.
for the Series A or seed
Yeah.
stage startup, right? But they're great talent. They're just not great talent for you. So,
I couldn't agree more. And I'll tag on to what you said there, which is, one thing is companies are so obsessed with snagging great talent. And the other aspect that companies are so hyper focused on is, oh, we want to be a high performance culture, right? But high performance culture doesn't come without having the right talent in the right seats, which is going back to what you just said. You can't just hire a meta engineer and immediately think your company or your culture is going to transform into high performance culture because these people came from Meta or some of those other great names that we know, right, Lynee?
yes, yeah. And I know I debunk that a little bit because I did come from really large companies and small companies, and I feel like I've had success and kind of stayed at this smaller scale. But like I said earlier, it really was about me being clear on what I was
Hmm.
signing up for and not hoping that the company or the environment would change on my timeline, but being, again, you clear about what I owned in the experience. And I think there's trade-offs between big company and small company. And I just am at that stage in life where I really love the small company or the medium-sized company.
I want to definitely touch upon this aspect on your journey through an Envoy, which is you executed a 30% reduction in force at Envoy during COVID. And those who were impacted publicly applauded your execution of that riff, right? I want to stay on that because it's so rare. Walk me through how you executed and what you did specifically that most companies didn't do, which is what caused people to applaud the way it was done.
Yeah, now you're taking me back to those COVID times. You know, first thing is that Envoy made software for people to go into offices, right? And when all offices shut down or many of the offices shut down and people couldn't go into the office, the renewal revenue and the outlook on new revenue went way down. So I would say the first thing is we weren't doing a riff like out of the blue. Like there was a real business driving factor. And so as a leader, like my first thing is how can we provide as much clarity to our employees about the business conditions and bring them along on that journey and in that story so they don't feel surprised by what's going on. So first things first was like being able to set that stage. Even before we had the riff, we knew that there was impact to our business. We didn't have insight into when it was all going to be over. I think if you recall back then, we thought everything was going to reopen by summer and then everything would be reopened by fall, and the timeline kept changing. So part of it was like that, making our business conditions known and transparent and bringing people on in the journey. And then when we got to the place where we didn't think that we could operate the company at the same size that it was, for me as a people leader, I always think of how do we do this with as much respect and dignity as possible? And we were lucky enough that we were able to provide severance packages. And I know some companies that were very small back then, they didn't even have the cash runway to do that. So again, we weren't providing, FANG or really large company size, but we were providing meaningful packages that aligned with our abilities. And so being able to explain that. But I think the second part that really differentiated it is I wanted to make this as personal as possible. And part of the reason is because people were already locked up in their homes, very uncertain about, their family and their livelihood and their life outside of work. It was a really scary time back then. So we made sure that, yes, we had messaging at the corporate level at the beginning, at the end. But we also made sure that everyone got a one-on-one personal conversation about why we made the decision that we made. And they also had HR support in the room that was able and scripted to tell them about all the resources, how Cobra works, how we were going to set up an alumni network, how we would serve as references. These were not performance, reductions. Of course, they had to do with roles and business conditions. So it was really more of a white glove approach to a riff. And we had a choice. Were we going to do it in the fastest, most efficient way and assume that people understood why, or were we going to build, intentional, deliberate steps that I thought showed dignity and respect? I wasn't expecting any of this to pay off or like people to have a positive experience about something that's so hard. That just happened. It just happened. But I really spent a lot of time just thinking about, that dignity and respect for the people.
Sounds like a really well thought out and empathetic approach to, moving people on from Envoy. I love that. Let's move on to your Nerd Wallet chapter, your most exciting and most recent chapter, Lynee. So I think when you started, NerdWallet was moving from a single revenue line to multiple lines while you were there. And that brings with it a very different kind of scaling challenge, not just related to headcount growth. I'm curious about where did the people infrastructure either become the unlock or become the constraint on that expansion? If you could elaborate on which way it went and how did you move past that, that would really be interesting.
Yeah. NerdWallet today is very different than when I joined. Like you said, it was centered more around one revenue line. And now I would describe it as a portfolio company with
Hmm.
various revenue lines. And it was, from a tactical standpoint, it was a group of people that were mostly physically located in San Francisco, to today where the corporate side embraces remote and we have offices in various areas and not in San Francisco. So there is
Mm.
no physical footprint. So things, I feel like 180, right? It really did change. And when I reflect back, I think it was my role and the people team's role of how do we shepherd that business transformation from a people side. And that didn't necessarily mean we owned every single piece, but how could we help facilitate or design the pieces that were necessary to do that kind of change? And an example that I think of is when we introduced these new business lines, uh, which we either built in house or organically built them or acquired companies. So none of it was standard. It was almost like we would use any tool possible to kind of foster this growth. Um, but what we did is we moved from a fully functional org design to a more business unit distributed org design. So each business unit had its own pod of resources, its
Mm.
own, technologist, its own product managers, its own marketing people. And so we had to eliminate some roles and offer these like new roles. So, people who had been at NerdWallet for years and years and years and who were part of going back to this part of building this great brand and this great success story now had to look at like the new NerdWallet that was emerging and decide, does this still make sense for me? Am I still going to be able to use my skills and grow in the way that I want to? So our people team really were partners to the organization throughout that process. I always say it's about making the implicit explicit. So
Mm.
instead of just saying, we have new roles, sign up for them. What do these roles mean? Let's write job descriptions. Do they have new titles? Are they going to be compensated differently? Again, all these things where it's like, oh, that should be assumed, or don't people know? It's like, no, people don't. We're asking them to sign up for a new way of operating and a new way of doing business. It's almost like, let's treat this like a brand new company then.
Mm.
And we have to rebuild some of those basics in infrastructure so people can understand what that change means and what they're signing up for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the people function plays a big role in instituting that kind of a change across the company when you're trying to operationally change from one way of doing things to the other, and with complete reorgs of how the functions are built or stay, or completely moving to this new business unit structure that you shared, Lynee. I can only imagine how intense it might have been as a people leader at that point in time to cultivate that change across the company. It's not easy because, as we spoke about, humans are not machines, and every small change triggers a whole slew of defense mechanisms and, I don't want to change mentalities that you have to navigate. So that's huge. How long did that kind of a change take for you to see through?
I think it's still going on.
Oh,
It's
it's still going on.
like a multi-year process,
Okay.
right? That is one thing I've learned as well is, there's so much excitement when you have a brand new business or you're growing and changing in this way and you want to get everything done, at once. And what I've experienced in my own career is these are multi-year journeys. And um, it is great to have a vision and to, set that vision and communicate that vision, but it's not going to happen overnight. And
Mm,
so our jobs as executives and leaders is to break it into smaller pieces and make sure that we're reconnecting the employees and the organization with what progress looks like at each stage. I think some leaders might get themselves in trouble when they, have an unrealistic timeline around
mm,
this change. Uh, part of my experience, given that I've lived this a few times, is when I sit at the table with executives, um, is to kind of bring two visions to the table, which is one, like, yes, we have these excellent ambitions. We know that the company is going to look like this and, in the future. And then the other is, but we're here today. And how do we continue to do just some of those fundamentals, right? And make sure that we have the employees and have the talent that we need to get to that vision. Um, and sometimes it's just the day-to-day things, right? About being
yeah.
explicit, about living to our values, about holding up the mirror in the small decisions and making sure that that's in alignment with what we want for the future of the business.
Um, Talking further about NerdWallet, to add to everything that was going on, NerdWallet went public as well. That must have been an exciting time for you, Lynee, as you went through that process. But I'm curious, when you go public, you as a company and people function become visible to a completely different set of stakeholders. And what, how did you have to think differently about talent decisions, both culturally and structurally, after the IPO?
I think some differences that happened pre-IPO to post-IPO was really the kind of visibility and scrutiny that outside stakeholders have on the business now.
Mm,
So, to give an example, we had an independent set of board of directors, including a compensation committee that also looked at the talent mapping and talent plans for the organization. And when you're not public and you don't have to file like public proxies and annual reports and have votes that are out there in the public, you don't necessarily have to share your plans
mm-hmm,
with everyone. But when you are public, you have to make sure that your programs and plans are right sized and effective for your internal audience first. But you also have to make sure that your plans and processes make sense and can be explained in a public setting as well. So, to make some of that maybe a little bit more real, um, executive compensation. So I've been at companies, not necessarily NerdWallet, but I've been at, non-public companies, and a company can be very creative and very tailored with how they do executive compensation and maybe even decide to change the way they do it every single year. Um,
mm,
but now, when you're under the public eye, you have to make this public and you have to explain what you've done and why you've done it. And so, having like consistency, having more of a 3-year view instead of a 1-year view on why you're doing things, ensuring that it does stand up to the scrutiny of pay for performance, which lots of governance bodies are concerned with. You just have two audiences now. And that doesn't mean that you can't be creative and you can't do things that are right for your business, but you just have to make sure that you can draw that link and have a coherent story for that if you had to explain it to external audience.
You sit on the comp committee as well, right, Lynee? It's not a seat that most CPOs commonly hold. So for you to sit on the comp committee, is there a different kind of unlock it provides in terms of the visibility and the kind of decisions you're able to make because of that insight that you have now that you sit on the comp committee as well?
Yeah, I think it's common in a public company setting, but I don't know. Now I want to research this.
I'm not sure either. Maybe I misspoke. Yeah,
Um,
I'm going to research as well.
I think maybe at a public company or a private company, you don't necessarily have to have a separate individual compensation committee. Um, you probably have a small enough board. It's probably a board made of investors, so you can cover all
Yes.
topics in one meeting. When you do, become public and have this independent board, and if your company is large enough, you can start to segment into, general board meeting and then specialty board. So I sat on the comp committee the entire time that I was at NerdWallet. What this strengthens is the link between people programs and business objectives, because boards don't necessarily think about anything in its specialty. They're not thinking of initiatives that you're taking on as a marketing initiative
Mm-hmm.
or as a people initiative. Their oversight is the whole organization. What is the entire business plan? And these are just like details and ways that you're going to make the business more successful, that you're going to make the business plan more successful. So the one thing is always being able to link the program to the overall business health and why it makes sense, and the business strategy, why it'll help the business strategy. So I rarely speak in terms of this as a people program, and more context setting for where the business is at, what the opportunity or problem is that we're trying to solve, and how this particular proposal that I'm bringing up for review or approval will help us accomplish that. And so I think that framing
Mm.
and that discipline is something that you have to remember when you sit on any kind of board, board committee or in a board meeting in general, from my experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No conversation is complete today without the word AI thrown into it. Lynette. So I'm going to take us down that path for just this one question here. You published a framework for what AI means for the HRBP role. And I think you got to that after looking at IBM's AI handling about 90% of routine HR questions, I think. And then you've also said you bet on the human differentiator, not anything against AI, not anti-AI, but as a strategic way of positioning humans. So I'm curious, what specifically does human judgment in the talent function, or where does it create leverage that AI can't replicate, and vice versa? Where can the people function, uh, leverage AI and hand over things to AI, and vice versa?
Yeah, and I'm by no means an AI expert. I'm not sure anybody is.
Nobody is an AI expert at this point.
Given what I'm seeing in the media and everything like that, even the AI companies themselves. But as you said, I definitely love embracing new ways of working and new technologies. And, I'm old enough where I lived through the switch to internet where everything was paperless then, and then, digital and the cloud and everything like that. I do think this is different. This speed is different for this particular technology. But in my experience and in building within my team as well as myself, what I'm seeing as a theme is it's great at taking away some of that repeatable routine work. And then what's left is the work that I think we've all really wanted to spend the majority of our time on anyway, which is the work that takes judgment, that takes discernment, that takes that not repeating a existing script, but creating a new script based on the problem set in front of you. So I really come back to when I think about what does AI fluency mean? What does it mean for my team to be AI fluent? I think it really just surfaces those skills that we've all, known and wanted in our team, right? Goes back to curiosity, being growth mindset oriented, data driven, and really trying to understand the drivers before we go to a solution. And there's two examples. We did have some success implementing AI to eliminate some of the work around level 1 and level 2 tickets. My team that were doing those level 1 and level 2 tickets, they don't miss that work. I mean, that wasn't work that they were like dying to keep. But I think the scary part is, well, what do I do now? Right? If I'm not spending my time there. So as people leaders, as executives, as leaders in organization, I think that's our job, right? How do we help create a story and create an understanding of, okay, what do I want you to work on next? If you didn't have to do this task-based repeatable work, and how do I start making that clear, judging you on that, training you on that, if it means training you. And I think that's how we're going to really unlock the full potential of AI in an organization. I put myself in that camp that wants to embrace the technology and wants to also embrace the humans that will be using the technology. And it's more of a side by side experience rather than, eliminating all
Yeah.
people roles in general and just relying here.
I'm going to ask you for an example on the human judgment side. You said there are certain things that human judgment and discernment is critical. Curious, just give me one example of where you think this task is definitely a human task and it's not something we should be leveraging AI for.
Um, I think let's take performance feedback
Mm-hmm.
for an employee. And it
Mm.
can be good feedback or constructive, critical feedback for an employee. Um, we were experimenting with building kind of a conversation or performance conversation chatbot using
Mm-hmm.
AI. And I love the fact that we can give a tool like this to managers to help gather their thoughts and to really help them understand what they wanted to bring forward to HR in terms of the performance. So it helped them almost like as a thought partner and an editing partner. But I wouldn't say that it was ready to then go from manager to employee after just a couple of exchanges on AI. I think what it was ready for was manager, AI, thought partnership, now go to HR so that we could really pressure test against the context of what's going on in the organization, the values in the organization, maybe some information that manager didn't have purview to that an HR partner would have purview to. So that's where you can get a really rich discussion. We don't have to do a first level conversation with the manager about like, this is what a PIP looks like. This is what it means to be clear about giving someone feedback or performance feedback. You've done all that. Now we can get to the real meat of a conversation and think about, what the right approach is.
That makes a difference, right? Having your manager talk through your performance is definitely something I would value rather than getting it from a bot.
Yeah. And I mean, the reality is there's managers, especially in environments that you and I are connected to, who've never done a top
Yes.
performance message. And I
Yes.
think that's okay to leverage AI of like, what is a performance message? What makes a good performance message? What are some things that I should be thinking about? And then you have that baseline understanding for yourself as a manager, and you now have baseline set of thoughts. But what do I do with this? I think that is really what takes that human partnership and that experience and that context that you get from a human, not
Absolutely.
a chatbot. You don't want it hallucinating at that point.
Oh, yeah. That would be a disaster. A hallucinated bot giving you a performance feedback. Oh, gosh. Um, Lynee, I'm moving us into the end of the conversation here. I'm going to take us through a couple of rapid fire questions and then the last question of the day here. Um, Rapid fire, feel free to go shallow or deep. It's up to you. What's the best people decision generally? Is it a hire or an exit?
Ooh, I want to go glass half full. So I would say a hire, because you have so many opportunities to take advantage of that, bringing in, the right skill set to make those come to life. That's fun. That's the fun part.
Okay. Um, what's a thing that companies call a people problem, but is actually a leadership problem?
Can I say everything?
Yes, I can see that. I can see that.
I mean, really, maybe one of the worst offenders is culture,
Mm,
where they think culture is, the people problem or any one person's problem or remit, when culture, I think, as we all know, is a living, breathing thing that evolves and changes with each experience, with each decision that's made, including on, line level employee interaction with someone. Like it's everything that's going on in an organization. And that means it's a distributed problem and it's everyone's responsibility. People can definitely shepherd and bring subject matter expertise, but I really think it is that distributed executive ownership.
yes. Gut or data when it comes to people decisions? Which one do you actually trust more?
Oof. I am guilty of gut reaction and then seeking data to understand if there's any there.
Hmm.
But I really keep in mind, how do I not make this a confirmation bias game where I'm just looking for data to confirm what I believe? I really try to do the devil's advocate of like, okay, I found data that confirms what I believe. Let me bring skepticism to this. Like, is there data that would disprove what I found and what I believe? But I will say, after many years of experience, it's natural to just have that gut reaction, because I've seen so many like patterns and different data
Yes,
sets and stuff. But I will rarely move on a gut reaction without digging into data.
I love that. And last rapid fire question for you. One thing you would want to tell your Chevron intern self.
My first day of my internship at Chevron, we all gathered in a conference room and we were going to have a kickoff by the head of HR. And they couldn't make it because a group of people that were on an oil rig in South America were going through some kind of crisis. There was like
Oh,
a leak or a health crisis. So eventually the head of HR did join our little first day in the afternoon, and they explained like why they couldn't make it. And I was like, whoa, what kind of job did I sign up for? Right?
yeah.
Like a leak in an oil rig in the middle of the ocean in South America. Like, that's a job for the HR person. Well, yeah, it is. Like at a good company where you are thinking about all aspects of the business. Um, that is a part of the HR or the people leader's job. So I guess it would just be like, think bigger, right? Don't
Think bigger.
just think about your lane, think about the entire business and how you can impact the entire business.
Amazing, amazing. And the last question here, signature question for the day, Lynee. What's one talent decision that you were a part of that changed a business outcome that maybe no one in the room recognized as a talent decision when it was being made?
I would say, one thing, and I don't know if I can't speak for everyone on
Yeah.
whether or not they thought it was a talent decision. But when I first joined NerdWallet, we were still in the middle of COVID and our lease was coming up. And I had
Oh,
oversight of real estate and workplace as well. I've had that at the last few jobs. And we had to make a decision on whether or not to renew the lease or to explore something new. And we hadn't yet made a decision on whether we were going to go fully remote. So I did make the decision to let go of the lease. And I think it had a huge impact on our employee experience, how we executed talent strategy. We, fast forward, we were able to go remote. We were able to take advantage of talent outside of San Francisco at scale. We hadn't done that before. Um, it was a new way of operating, and it really has worked for a company like NerdWallet to be able to spread the talent across different locations. As of today, almost all of the leadership team are in different locations. They're not even sitting together in one location. And that allowed us to take advantage of skill sets that maybe wouldn't have joined if we were only centered in San Francisco. So I look back and I think in isolation, it could have been
mm,
viewed as just, a lease decision in San Francisco, but it had such a larger compounding impact on what we were able to do and the choices we were able to make for the talent after that decision was made.
that sounds like a massive unlock for the business, after the decision was made.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Lynee. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed myself as well.
Thanks for listening to People Multiple. If you found today's conversation valuable, don't forget to give us a 5-star review and share it with a colleague or fellow investor. And don't forget to follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media using the information on the screen and in the show notes below. This has been a production of the AGN Group. I am Jia Ganesh, and I'll see you next week as we continue to explore how talent shapes multiples.